Starting off when Rockefeller was just a small businessman selling oil, procuring oil, drilling some of his own, and turning around and selling it, and how he ended up owning most of the oil.
Like his devout mother, Laura strengthened John's sense that he was doing God's work, not only in church, but also in business. Rockefeller's future, however, was harnessed to an industry in trouble. So many wells were flowing, he lamented, that the price of oil kept falling, yet they went right on drilling. He saw an industry plagued by overproduction, and his own success threatened by what he described as ruinous, cutthroat competition.
John D. was shrewd enough and he was analytical enough that he realized that in order to figure out a way to save his own firm and his own newly won fortune, that he had to figure out a solution for the entire industry. It was at that point that John D. began to conceive of the oil industry as one big interrelated mechanism. And you couldn't just change one component, you had to control the entire machine.
In a move that would transform the American economy, Rockefeller set out to replace a world of independent oilmen with a giant company controlled by him. In 1870, begging bankers for more loans, he formed Standard Oil of Ohio. The next year, he quietly put what he called Our Plan, his campaign to dominate the volatile oil industry, into devastating effect. Rockefeller knew that the refiner with the lowest transportation cost could bring rivals to their knees. He entered into a secret alliance with the railroads called the South Improvement Company. In exchange for large, regular shipments, Rockefeller and his allies secured transport rates far lower than those of their bewildered competitors. Ida Tarbell, the daughter of an oilman, later remembered how men like her father struggled to make sense of events. An uneasy rumor began running up and down the oil regions, she wrote. Freight rates were going up. Moreover, all members of the South Improvement Company, a company unheard of until now, were exempt. Nobody waited to find out his neighbor's opinion. On every lip, there was but one word, and that was conspiracy.
What it really represented was the face of monopoly. It immediately became clear that the entire nature of the enterprise was going to change in ways that spelled their doom. And so there was a shock of recognition that they were going to be left behind and that a whole world that had been opened up to them was soon to close.
The image that was always used was that of the anaconda, the squeezing python-like grips of this economic snake that was just taking individual entrepreneurs and just putting them out of business and reducing them to kind of economic strait where they had no alternative but to really to sell out to the principles in this conspiracy. It was a conspiracy, really. It was one of the first great economic conspiracies in this country.
In an effort to thwart the scheme, many independents refused to sell crude oil to Rockefeller and his associates. Undaunted, Rockefeller used the threat of the South Improvement Company to intimidate his rival refiners in Cleveland. His brother and business partner William characterized the plan as war or peace, sell out to Standard Oil or suffer the consequences. At first, they approached their targets with deference and flattery. Rockefeller himself used his own considerable talent for persuasion, presenting Standard Oil as a brotherhood based on cooperation.
He had this missionary faith that he was destined to to guide this industry. And when he took over his rivals, he not only wanted their plans, he often wanted the managers. So it was not in his interest to alienate them. He much preferred convincing people to sell to him voluntarily rather than trying to squeeze them through terror tactics, although if necessary he would resort to very rough methods in order to soften them up, or he used a phrase, to give them a good sweating before he negotiated with them.
Rockefeller might create a shortage of the railroad tank cars that transported oil. He might go out and buy up all the barrels on the market, so a competitor would have no place to store his oil or ship it. He would even buy up all the available chemicals that were necessary to refine the oil.
It would be impossible to do today what Rockefeller did. There's laws against it. But what's important to understand about antitrust is that, just make sure you understand when I say antitrust, that's the legislation intended to prevent people from gaining monopolies in industries like Rockefeller did. The purpose of antitrust regulation is not to protect consumers. It's a very common misconception. Even though it's always presented that way, I haven't yet to see a case of when that was actually the case. You know, we tend to think of Standard Oil. Rockefeller got this big monopoly, and with the monopoly he could jack up oil prices and make tons and tons of money. But here's the thing. This is a graph of oil prices. You've got 1869 over here, and Rockefeller started eating up all the market share, gaining his monopoly about right here, about 1871. And he was done. He basically had control over about everything around 1879. So during this phase, when the oil market moved from being a competitive market to a monopoly, we see prices actually falling. So the prices that consumers were paying, everybody who bought oil to use for something, was falling. The monopoly was good for consumers, and in most cases, it is. Think about the antitrust that was levied at Google. Was the antitrust regulation protecting you from Google? You know, what did Google do to you when they don't really sell you anything? They give away everything. It wasn't about you, the consumer. For Google, it wasn't about you, the consumer, in Standard Oil. It never has been, and it still isn't. The real reason we have antitrust regulation is the same reason we protect U.S. sugar producers. Not always quite as corrupt, but same basic reason. In that little story, you saw Rockefeller put so many people out of business, and all those people who got put out of business hated Rockefeller. And you saw the cartoon where Rockefeller was depicted as a snake. Antitrust regulation was meant to protect the people who could not compete against Rockefeller. The people who, when it came to the marketplace, they couldn't make money. Somebody was outdoing them. Instead of going bust, they went to the government instead and said, protect us from this person. And it's always been that way. And it still is. When it comes to Google, it was not consumers complaining to the government. It was all of Google's competitors who were having a hard time. And we get from Microsoft, for one. And a good reason Microsoft wanted the government to go after Google to help them with their Bing search is because in the 80s, when Microsoft was out competing companies like Netscape Navigator, a browser you may not remember, it was like the first one I used. As Microsoft was out competing Netscape Navigator went to the government and they tried to sue Microsoft and bring antitrust regulation down. So it's always been the case that the people who really want the antitrust regulation are the people who are losing in the marketplace. The destruction part of creative destruction. but it's always presented as a way to protect consumers. But you look at all these cases, and I've heard someone officially send out this charge, and no one's ever been able to bring him an example. Name a case of antitrust when the monopoly was actually harming consumers. Very hard to do. So this, we're talking about market power here, and just the name market power automatically makes it seem bad. But in many ways it can be good, and we need to understand that distinction. That's one of our main objectives here. So how was it that Rockefeller was able to do all this? Well, he was just able to run things more efficiently. He was able to lower costs. He could sell oil at lower price to everybody. He ran other people out of business. The same reason Walmart ran all the other stores out of business, with mom and pop stores. Because they could produce at lower costs. In Google's case, they provide higher value. But the point is that consumers consented for the monopoly to exist. You choose to trade with Google. We all choose to trade with Google because we all want to trade with Google. They're our preferred trading partner. And because so many people want to trade with them, they get their near monopoly. I didn't put this in the announcements, but it will be up Monday. For next week labs, I will want you to do the rest of the sheets for the partial plan after college. Let's go to our slides here. We left off talking about what a monopoly, oligopoly is, things like that. By the way, I looked into the Ticketmaster StubHub thing, and I didn't spend a lot of time looking, but it doesn't seem like StubHub is owned by Ticketmaster. It doesn't seem like that case to me. So really, Ticketmaster and StubHub would be more of an oligopoly. But on homeworks or tests, I will not present you with a product and ask you if it's a monopoly. We did those examples just here. Here's the kind of questions that you'll see on the clickers today, that you'll see on the homework, that you'll see on the test. You've got on your sheet these market structures from perfect competition to monopsony to monopoly. And you need to know a couple things, like you'll see a question, something like this. Which market is best described as a market with a few sellers and many buyers? Few sellers, many buyers, oligopoly. Simple as that. It really will be that simple. Another question. Which type of market structures result in prices greater than an oligopsony price? Oligopsony is right here. You move up from here. It's when the sellers start to have more market power. You can see here price goes up. So the market structures that have a higher price in oligopsony is perfect competition, is oligopoly, is monopoly. You just got to know those words, know the vocabulary, what it means for prices. The one that we're going to be looking at today is perfect competitions when there are many buyers and sellers. We're going to talk about live cattle again and how the number of buyers of live cattle has shrunk, which has made the live cattle market something more of an oligopsony. Look at Walmart and how it's gained a much larger market share in the grocery store business, and it's taken the food retail business away from perfect competition and towards oligopoly. In this case, the sellers get more market power. You would think price would go up if everything else stays the same. And there's also a thing called a thin market. You know, sometimes if there's a good that's not traded very often. You go to a used. One time I went to one of those auctions at a houses, and they had this really old John Lennon album. I didn't even know that album existed. There's a few people who sell those things now, but a few people who buy them. Neither one of us knew what a good price was, so we just negotiated. Meaning I threw a temper tantrum until they gave me a good price. I wiped my tears, took my John Lennon out, and said, later. Thin market's just, if there's just a few buyers or sellers, and it's just a few people negotiating on both sides, you don't know which one's going to have more negotiating power. So you can't say what the price goes up today. Best thing to just remember about thin markets, this may be a good thing to write. Thing to remember about thin markets, have no idea what the price will be. No way to tell. No idea if the price is high or low. As we start to talk about more complex issues where monopolies can actually lower prices, we have to remember this. In our market structures, I got monopoly over there at a high price. One single seller can dictate price and charge a high price. Down at the bottom, I've got monopsony, where there's only one buyer, so that one buyer can negotiate a low price. But think back to our general theory of prices. We know that price has to be greater than the seller's opportunity cost. However much it costs to produce it, the seller wants a higher price than that. And it has to be lower than the buyer's value. The buyer isn't going to pay more than what its value is. There'll be a question on the homework and on the clickers that's something like this. Suppose I say we go from perfect competition to oligopoly. We go from perfect competition to oligopoly. And then neither value nor cost change. So we're going from perfect competition to oligopoly. Neither the buyer's value nor the seller's cost changes. What happens to price? Price rises. Because all we're saying is that everything else in the world is staying the same. How much consumers value it, the cost of producing it. All that's happening is you go from perfect competition to oligopoly. The sellers, there's fewer of them, and they get more negotiating power, so they're able to negotiate a higher price. So you can, when you want to know what happens to price, you can always use this diagram, the higher price here, the lower price for a monopoly, and cost and value stays the same. But in every real world case we're going to look at, except for ones when government gives you a monopoly, cost and value doesn't stay the same. And now we're going to look at three issues. These are three examples: live cattle, Walmart, and sugar. These are the only examples you would be expected to know. I'm going first to live cattle. The first two bullets talk about what live cattle is. We did that last time. It's cattle ready to be slaughtered. This third bullet, circle this. I do want you to know the information in there. So that's the key piece. You are responsible for knowing that I could test you on about what happened in the live cattle. And it says in 1982, the four largest beef processors, that's the people who take their live cow, slaughter it, cut it into chunks of beef to sell to wholesalers, sometimes. It used to be that the four biggest purchased 41% of all live cattle. It was a rather competitive industry. Lots of sellers and lots of buyers. But now, since then, that number has risen to 80%. So that there are four people, four firms, four corporations, who buy 80% of all the live cattle. And there are lots of people selling live cattle. So you would certainly think, and it is certainly true, that the buyers have more market power than the sellers. I believe that. And so for that, we think about this as going from a competitive market, perfect competition, to an oligopoly, where there are just a few sellers. But something else changes too. The reason this happened was because, you know these slaughtering plants. many of you, raise your hand if you've toured a slaughtering plant before. They're huge. The modern ones are absolutely huge. It's almost like a little city. I've been in one when I would say they slaughter 8,000, 10,000 head of cattle a day. I'm scared that actually may be pigs, and I'm saying a complete lie. But a lot. And you watch them, they slaughter an animal one after another and moves down the chain line very quick. Huge. The reason they build them so big is because they get this thing called economies of scale. They experience economies of scale. The bigger you are, the lower your cost of production on a per pound basis. And so they were able to process beef at a low cost compared to their rivals who had a smaller slaughtering facility. And so they were able to sell at lower prices and drive their rivals out of business exactly like Rockefeller did. Actually, not exactly. It wasn't as devious. You can't be as devious as Rockefeller was. Now you're just more efficient. You can go out there and you sell at lower prices. And other people try to match those prices, but they realize that it loses them money. So they close down and sell out to the big boys. So lots of people go bust, but the few remain, get bigger. Now this is the key. That lower cost is the key. Because even though they have more market power, because it's cheaper for them to take a cow and turn it into wholesale beef, they value live cattle more. They value live cattle more because it's cheaper for them to turn that live cow into beef. That means they value the live cattle more. So now this thing, consumer value, is not the same. And the next slide's going to show this. So I want to repeat it one more time. What happened here was the buyers gained market power, but the buyer's value for the product actually went up as well. So this one slide, in the previous slide I circled that one thing about what I want you to know about the change in live cattle industry. This slide tells us the outcome, what we know about the outcome, theoretically. I'll talk about empirical in a minute. Well, here's what happens. As the beef process industry consolidates, the theoretical impact on the live cattle price is ambiguous. So if you're asking what happens when the four biggest firms went from processing 40% of beef to 80%, how does that change the actual price